At some point in life, everyone has to come to terms with reality. Some people handle it well, and some people decide, you know what, I'm just gonna fake it until everyone believes me. And honestly, sometimes it works.
Wow, Bud got a real woman and all we got is dead wood. You know, that girl with Bud was checking.
All right, so this episode is juggling two very different kinds of desperation. On one side, you've got Al, who is absolutely convinced that he's finally come up with something to change his life. Not improve it, not help it, change it. And the problem is, we all know someone like this. Someone who thinks they're one idea away from escaping, and that idea is always just a little off. And then on the other side, you've got Bud, who's dealing with a much more relatable problem. Everyone around him is moving forward, and he's stuck, which is honestly one of the most universal feelings there is. Until, of course, he handles it in the most Bundy way possible. And what the episode does really well is it takes those two ideas, wanting to be seen as successful and not wanting to be left behind, and push both of them just far enough into absurdity to make it funny. So with that in mind, welcome back to The Rank. I'm John, and today we're going to be ranking the 19th episode of the third season of Married with Children, titled The Dateless Amigo. Written by Sarah V. Finney and Vita Spears and directed by Jerry Cohen. Let's see how this one stacks up, starting with the episode overview. So first of all, I just have to mention that IMDb and the streaming services disagree on this episode. So The Dateless Amigo aired as the 19th episode, but apparently the computer show was produced before this one. So I was confused when I started watching this on the streaming service, and it was the computer show and not the Dateless Amigo. So I figured I would mention that I'm following the release date of episodes, except for the Lost episode, which I did in the middle, but I feel like that makes sense. But in this episode, we're going to learn that there's a shoe convention that Al and Peggy are going to, and that apparently Peggy really likes to go to every year, even though she realizes that that's pathetic. Al, however, is not excited about it. It's just another place that reminds him of his failures, work and home, to which list Peg adds the bedroom. She wanted to make sure he didn't leave that out. The thing is, though, Al gets all the glamour of the shoe store, and Peg has to stay home, eating bonbons and watching TV. I mean, Al owes this to her. Even if he is embarrassed that because he's the salesman who makes the least, he has to introduce the salesman who makes the most. But I also really love the long look that he gives her after she says that he owes her this. Then she asks Al to take out the garbage, which he does. And as he's walking out holding the garbage can, we're gonna see Bud come down the stairs with two of his friends. And Al's gonna tell them, look at your future. But one of the kids, played by Steven Dorff, which I was not expecting, says that when he's married, he's gonna make his wife take out the garbage. And I get that this is so Peg can get a good line in, which is, you'll get to keep everything you earn too. Then I realized that the other friend is a very young Giovanni Ribisi. I just thought that was pretty cool. But Bud is trying to plan the next hang with his friends, but they can't hang out. They've got dates. But how? Well, instead of throwing rocks at girls, they talk to them. But Bud shouldn't feel bad. They're still amigos. He's just the dateless amigo. And as the kids are saying this to him, we hear this scream from Al and this crashing sound from off screen. And Giovanni Ribisi is going to be like, what was that? And Bud's going to be like, I don't know. I guess my dad fell and hurt himself. And just immediately move on. I loved that he said it so matter-of-factly and then just didn't care. But Bud isn't going to just let this dateless amigo thing slide. He's like, since you guys are finally ready to start dating, I'll bring a date too. And since his parents are going to be out of town, his friends think it's a perfect opportunity for them to have a makeout party. I never got to go to a makeout party when I was in middle and high school. You see these shows all the time and they're like, oh yeah, the makeout parties all the time. I never heard of one. They probably had them and they just didn't invite me. No. Anyway, when the friends leave, Al comes back in and he calls them down. He's like, I've got a great idea. It's for an invention. But Peggy and Bud were hoping he was going to say that he was going to become a garbage man. But Al is undeterred, although he won't tell them what the invention is, which is weird because he called them down to hear this. So he just called them down to say, I've got an idea. I just wanted you to know I had an idea. So he goes to the basement to get to work on this invention, and off screen we hear him fall down the stairs and then suffer from a brief moment of amnesia. So in the next scene we get Bud trying to get a date and it doesn't go well. And at the same time, the Rhodeses are stopping by. And why are they stopping by? Well, because Al called them and told him he's got great news. So Steve's got a $70 bottle of champagne in one hand and a $10 bottle of wine in the other because he's ready to celebrate. $70 bottle of champagne, he says, are you guys moving out? No? Okay, let's go to the wine. Are you guys going on an extended vacation? No. All right, well, he'll give them both if it turns out Al is going to prison. Nice neighbors. But they're there because Al wants to show everyone his invention. He brings Kelly out and she's under a blanket. And it turns out that his invention is shoe lights, which ironically they have now, but not quite like this. She's got headlights on her feet that are attached to jumper cables, which are attached to like a car battery, which she's wearing like a backpack. I mean, it was quite the look. And every bit of this is goofy and fun. Naturally, nobody is impressed. Well, nobody except for Steve. And he's not necessarily impressed as much as he sees his own failed attempts to create a 99-cent coin reflected in this. He really encourages Al to chase his vision, but he's the only one. Kelly's gonna lament that Peg couldn't have married anyone else. To which Peg says, yeah, like I could have seen this coming. And then Bud says that Al can't call him son now, just Bud. And when Al says to Peggy he's gonna hold on to this dream to the bitter end, Peggy's gonna reply with, now she's really depressed because she thought this was the bitter end. And nobody will do the Bundy cheer with him. But after this is all over, Bud is gonna ask Kelly for a favor. He's been unlucky in finding a date and he's wondering if Kelly would be willing to set him up with one of her friends. She's not very helpful, as you might expect, though she does suggest that Bud get a mannequin, which is exactly what he ends up doing. Even though he says that the day he stoops low enough to date a mannequin is the day he truly earns the name Bundy. Now in the next scene when he's with the mannequin, he's putting lipstick on it and then he has it kiss his cheeks. And then he uses a vacuum cleaner on his neck to give himself a hickey. But before the friends come over, we're gonna get this still picture of a venue and a voiceover of Al talking at the convention. He's trying to unveil his shoe lights. But then we hear him yell out to Kelly, no, don't step in the coin fountain. And then we hear that a fire has started. I mean, basically, this has not gone well. But back to the house and the friends and their dates arrive and are super impressed by Bud and his date, who they don't realize is a mannequin, which really stretches the imagination. I mean, the girls are even wishing that they could date Bud because they're seeing how well he's treating the mannequin, I guess? Is it jealousy? I don't even know. It's weird. Of course, the other kids aren't helping themselves by saying that Bud has a real woman and all they have is dead wood. Yikes. Meanwhile, as they're saying this, the mannequin's head is coming off in Bud's hands. And then we get Bud trying to go up the stairs with Monique the mannequin. She's just falling apart on him and he's tripping and he's trying to tuck the body parts in his shirt. It was a great bit of physical comedy. The best that David Faustino has done on this show by a lot. He has true comedic timing here. So in answer to the previous episode's comment that I got, no David Faustino hate in this one. Then Al, Peggy, and Kelly get home and they look terrible, but Kelly looks the worst. And apparently Al stepped in dog shit on his way in and says he's got another idea, the Shooper Scooper. He's gonna suggest that Kelly just follow people around who have dogs and collect the droppings. It'll be huge. But Kelly, who's still suffering from electrocution, says, I'm not wearing Shooper Scoopers. And Al's like, that's just the electrocution talking. That's not my little girl. Now, when Al and Peggy leave the room, Kelly looks at Bud and says, well, my night was terrible. I was a Roman candle. How was yours? And Bud is holding the mannequin head in his hands after having just made a date for the next night with a girl and says, not bad. My date was a little stiff at first, but she loosened up. That's cute. But anyway, that's the whole episode. Let's find out how it ranked.
Oh, rank.
So the rank is where I rank the episode based on 5 categories: story, acting, dialogue, episode coherence, and character relatability. I rank it on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. Then I have a laugh counter where I tally up the amount of times the episode made me laugh. 1 point per laugh out loud gets added to the score. But before I dive into the rankings, I just want to say, if you're enjoying this episode, please leave a like down below. It really does help me out. But without further ado, the first category is story. Now, the title of the episode would lead me to believe that the A story was Bud dating a mannequin and it working out for him. But what about the other story with Al's invention? I feel like that was actually the A story. And what an absurd invention it was. Honestly though, teen boy tries to get a date and father has crazy terrible invention aren't bad stories. I gave it a 4.25. So that brings us to acting. And I know I got a comment last week about throwing shade at David Faustino's acting, but he really just isn't that great of an actor. However, I will definitely give him some props for his physical comedy acting in this episode. He actually seemed a little bit older than his years with that. Everyone else was good to great. Christina Applegate was good too. I gave it a 4.25. So that brings us to dialogue. It was definitely funny. There were some stretches of groan-inducing jokes though. Sometimes they lean a little too hard on the Al-Peggy dynamic or the weird sibling stuff with Bud and Kelly. Still though, it certainly wasn't bad. I gave it a 3.5. So that brings us to episode coherence. I think the hardest thing for me to buy in this episode was that the kids never realized that Bud was with a mannequin. Like really, nobody even tried talking to her? I mean, it's definitely fun, but it's also a little too goofy. It's also a little hard to believe that Steve would be so intent on a 99-cent coin. It really doesn't fit his character, so in that way, it really isn't coherent to the series. But still, these are minor things. I gave it a 4. So that brings us to character relatability. Al is convinced that he's got a good idea and he wants to follow it. I suppose that's relatable. Bud is desperate to not be left out in the dating world by his friends. I get that one too. The lengths they go to are a little beyond relatability, but that's kind of the point. I gave it a 3.25. So some okay rankings here. It's gonna take a decent laugh counter to keep it in the top 3 tiers, and it got me 14 times, which is pretty decent. That puts the episode total at a 33.25, which makes it an I'd watch it again. For the series average, it's at a 33.31, which keeps the series as an I'd watch it again. And if you're ranking along with me, drop your score in the comments. I'd be curious to see where you're at. But thanks for listening and or watching. Check out my other Married with Children ranking episodes or any of my other sitcom or movie ranking episodes on this channel. Remember to subscribe, comment, and like. You can find full up-to-date rankings on my website at therankpodcast.com, or you can also email me at john@therankpodcast.com. And if you really want to support the show, you can become a patron on our newly revitalized patreon.com/therankpodcast. But I will leave you with this. Ironically, do you know what Bud's friends' names were in this episode? Manny and Ken.
Not bad, not bad.
And directed by Jerry Cohen. So let's see how
Cut!
And directed by Jerry Cohen, motherfucker.
Cut!
So let's see how this one stacks up, starting with the potent notables. Nope, I don't know what I'm doing. Antonio, what am I doing?
You're messing up somehow.